Hello, I'm Gerard Rymouth from TERROIR, and very happy to be asked to present one of our houses that's shortlisted in the awards in New South Wales this year, Castle Cove House. I'll just get it up on the screen and we'll go through the presentation. The house was a long time in the making. We got the project in 2007. We fully designed and documented the house, and then the financial crisis hit, and then it went on pause, and then it came back again. So we're sitting here now 12 years after it started, having finally finished the house. It's located in Castle Cove, in the north, if you like, of Sydney, in a harbour. Incredibly beautiful area, and the site very particularly sits in one of these leftover sites. Many of you will know the history of course, housing in Sydney through the 50s and 60s. A lot of innovative houses, most famously Bill Lucas House and others, built in so-called unbuildable sites. This is not dissimilar, where you can see the Castle Cove suburb running along the ridgeline, and then this area below, and there's a little just pocket like an elbow there, where there are a few remaining houses, and the clients bought a very large site with a very small house on it and wanted to build a new project. So you can see there it sits just below the plateau, and where the contours really start running down, and you can see this almost shelf that our site is on, where the blue cross is, and then straight after that it really tumbles down into the inner harbour. That's that cross here. The house is heavily wooded and has been constantly regenerated by the owner, and there's a very large tree, scribbly gum, in a clearing, and a decision was made fairly early on to organise the house around that tree, and that would, in a way, became almost a sort of place where if you came to site you would camp adjacent to that tree as well, as it were. Like many TERROIR projects, there's always a thought about just the very simple patterns of circulation as one enters, and in this case how one comes into and around the tree. And I'll come back to this image a bit later, but this really talks about the way the geometry of the house is organised around the tree, and the view through and either side of the tree is a sort of central part of the project. These are images of the site. The top one is the view effectively from the main deck level. You can see the tree there in the foreground to the left. And the bottom one is actually a rock shelf underneath another tree just beyond the boundary of the house. And the house is, again, classic escarpment site, running down toward the water. And there's something about this quality, and I always love the way this sandstone almost goes as sort of concrete colour, if you like. As it gets older, of course, a lot of texture and colour. And we became very interested in talking to the clients about the idea of occupying a shelf, if that makes sense. So you'd say typical of TERROIR's work is sort of drive to abstraction, perhaps away from a normal sense of domesticity, but the abstraction that really talked to the power of being in this landscape. The top image there is of Woodson and Otke Neiman, I think, in a very famous rock shelf in Palm Beach, where he used to spend a lot of time. And there's this quality of being in one of these escarpments was really the idea of the house. You can see that here in the section, the way the house effectively gathers up the landscape and makes a sort of primary living shelf, if you like, under a roof. And you can see a subterranean area there that we'll get to in a second. So this is the house. You'll recognise it from the drawing a few slides ago. And again, you'll perhaps see the logic of the shelf in the top, and this very solid lower level with just very small windows, really exploring on purpose, if you like, the quality of that dark subterranean area. And you can see it here in plan. The clients, very early on, we started having these discussions about Bond films, particularly Dr. No, and use that out in the houses. And of course, the fact that often you have carports, not roller doors and all the rest of it. And of course, honestly, they were in a way happy to sort of participate in this, and they had a great sense of humour, and we sort of enjoyed the idea of creating a sort of bond layer, if you like. And I don't mean that in an extravagant sense. The house is not particularly big. In fact, it shrunk after the GFC, about another 25% from the first version. But you can see here the carport, entry stair, and then a gym, and then to the right, a bedroom. downstairs bedroom with a little window out to the tree. And then on the upper level, you can see, let's say, more conventional enfilade layout. Perhaps what's a bit unusual is, of course, the circulations running along the front, and that's all about, of course, moving backwards and forwards with the tree. What you will therefore note, though, is having the circulation on the front brings the bedrooms to the end of the plan. There's 2 bedrooms at the front there, the main bedroom and the bedroom for the daughter who lives at home. And there's some other daughters that no longer live at home that can occupy the rear bedrooms when they're there, and then a series of living spaces in the middle. And so this is really key to organisation of the house, is that the circulation is part of the room, and therefore, of course, to create privacy, the bedrooms are at the end. So you see it here in aerial view. This is taken about 1.5 years ago, and since then the landscape's grown up even further, particularly to the right. And you can see again here the house on approach. The geometry is a sort of found geometry, if that makes sense. So working with the diagram around the tree and then organising program in and around that diagram. And so a lot of these folds and pleats become the sort of after effect of basically joining lines together in space. So again, with a lot of TERROIR's work, there's a particular formal logic, which yes, pushes a sense of abstraction, but then the geometry itself is to some extent the art after effect of joining lines in space as program increases and reduces and so on. And you can see here the entry area, the carport just to the right out of picture, and those rooms upstairs. So when you go into the house, the downstairs, as I said, there's a corridor you can see here on the right, on the left, one of the subterranean rooms, the bedroom, deliberately dark and quite dramatic. One thing about this corridor, we see use of mirror, and what's not seen in this photo is a series of slots to upstairs, which I'll come back to later, which basically mean that the house is incredibly porous and sound and air. So there's environmental issues, also issues about being at home, continue throughout. The house, you might say, like a Stephen Hall project, has no middle scale. There's the large scale, the sculptural gesture, and the small scale of things you touch and nothing in between. And that nothing in between is really because there are the inhabitants, their artwork, their things. One of the 2 clients is a chef, so there's a huge focus on cooking and so on. This is the entry stair, and from there one goes upstairs. Again, you start to see another of these mirrors, and you come up top to this corridor along the front, or the deck, as you can see here. You can see the timber glimpse through the right image, and that's important perhaps to talk about at this point, that there are really only 2 systems. There's a concrete system and the timber system, which is a sort of series of pockets or layers inside the concrete system, then it's finished off with glass in terms of making the envelope, which again you can see here. So that's that view of the enfilade going along the front, and then you just basically have this constant turning left, if you like, or turning right if you're coming the other way, into a series of pockets. And so what's interesting about this house is, even though, again, it has this monumentality, something Richard Goodwin said very early about our work was this combination of monumentality and intimacy, and you can really see that throughout. And the right-hand image, again, you have one of these, rather than a handrail, there's a plate that deals with, of course, the regulations between falling into the lower level, and that allows, of course, air and sound up and down. So often you'll be somewhere in the house and you'll hear a sound from somewhere else. You're not quite sure where it is, which is a very beautiful part of being there. You can see the difference between that space between the bedrooms at the back on the right and on the left, sorry, and on the right, the enfilade along the front. And again, more of these details as part of the timber lining. The fact that there are some subterranean spaces means, again, that's been explored and is really a strong part of the agenda, that the spaces are highly variegated. So it's a relatively small house, but really it's of somehow infinite size, this house. There are always other spaces within other spaces within other spaces, and when you get in them, they'll then, as you see here, have a 3-story skylight to the top that runs through a space further up. This is really about a project of instruments, where we sort of use to describe the treatment of this house, to say that on the one hand there's a large sculptural gesture, and then there's a series of instruments, and these instruments are all about connecting the occupants with each other throughout the house, as I've described, or with the landscape. And so this creates, you might say, in a John Soane sort of a way, or Soane House in particular, of course, I'm thinking of. So here's the outside of the house with a series of these instruments They're always refracting light, views. You're in the deepest part of the house and you have this explosion out to the landscape. And so it's incredibly powerful as a set of experiences because it's also very unpredictable. And just the moment when you think you're at the most inner, you explode back out again. So that's really, I suppose, a summary of how the house works. You can see here, again, some of these light tubes as part of those instruments. There's a set which are all about mirrors and this refraction I talked about. And yeah, you get a sense of some of the power of these spaces. So there it is. The other part of this presentation I was asked to talk about was some other projects shortlisted in the awards. So I'll take my final minute to talk about these. They're all projects in the small category and they're done by a series of friends, Crofi, Aileen Sage, Crawford, Lars Nimmo, and they're all toilets. And the funny thing about that is that I think it's just a fabulous thing, not to perhaps talk about one project, but to talk about a program that's really huge in New South Wales, where you have some of the best architects in the country designing the most basic public amenities. And I think it's very interesting to reflect on the amount of money and energy that's spent on some very, very large buildings of far lesser quality. And we have this sort of situation where some of our best architects are doing these projects. And I say that not to lament it, but to say what a fantastic thing that the most basic of public facilities, but very important facilities, these moments of publicness when you're in a park or in a landscape, are designed by some of our best architects. And I think therefore it's fantastic in the awards program this year to see a whole suite of them all vying for the Small Project Award. So thank you very much. I think I just made my 10 or 11 minutes. Again, very pleased to be asked. Thank you.